Okay, so here we are, our final segment of this chapter. And in this segment, we're going to talk about some specific kinds of trainings that are oftentimes related to diversity issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about sexual harassment training, and we're going to talk about workplace diversity management and training for that. So just in case you can't really read my little cartoon, it says, "Gee, I'm really sorry. You can sexually harass me back if you want." And on the right-hand side, it says, "Same moves, same clothes, same faces, same old ideas. Try diversity." So let's get started. Sexual harassment training. Boy, I will tell you what, talk about your growth industry since 1991 for IO psychologists. The development of sexual harassment training has been the bread and butter of many an IO psychologist for the past few decades. Part of the reason why is because there are some serious consequences that come from sexual harassment. First off, widespread implications on work outcomes. People oftentimes do not work as well if they are in a harassing situation. And so just at a very pragmatic level for an organization, it makes a lot of sense to eliminate sexual harassment as much as they can. For the employee, there are a lot of psychological and somatic outcomes. Somatic means physical symptoms that can actually last for years in the harassed employee. So it's something that, again, if you have an employee who is committed to the organization and wants to continue working there, this could be something that has an impact on their work performance for this organization for a really long time. So just being super pragmatic about that, it's in a company or organization's best interest to eliminate this sort of situation. There are lots of negative effects on the organization that are unrelated to the first two that I mentioned, like, for example, loss of trust in the organization, feelings of hostility between groups within the organization, loss of good employees from the organization. And so there are a lot of really just bottom line reasons why organizations should be really concerned about this issue. The big push is that training can be the best tool against harassment. I'm hesitating as I'm saying that because it's the most used tool against harassment. I'll say that. It may not necessarily change a lot of the more subtle behaviors, but it does get rid of things like inappropriate material posted in cubicles and things like that. Research suggests that behavior modeling may help individuals to become more sensitive to sexual harassment behaviors. And so if we can train all the employees to behave in certain ways or to act in certain ways or to respond in certain ways, it can help to spread to all the employees, even the ones who have gone through the training and maybe thought it was silly or didn't think it applied to them or something like that, will oftentimes change their behavior because other people have changed their behavior. And then the other thing that research has pointed out is that males and females may view behaviors differently with respect to their potential for being sexual harassment. A lot of times women view behaviors, particularly from men, differently than men intend those behaviors or other men interpret those behaviors. And so there's like a little bit of a divide, and training can really help to bridge that divide, to make it clearer that certain behaviors are harassment, certain jokes or materials in your workspace or other kinds of things can be harassing. And so having your eyes open to that can be really super helpful. There's something that I don't have prepared on my slide, but that I've started to try and look into over the past year or so. And that is the benefits to the potentially harassed person. A lot of sexual harassment early in like the early 90s through the mid 90s were really focused on the men in the corporation or the organization. And the assumption was that men needed to be taught how to behave differently. And that has worked up to a certain point in reducing sexual harassment in the workplace. But the other side of the coin, and by the way, they no longer just do sexual harassment training for men. Everybody takes it now. But the other side of the coin is, and I've noticed in all the sexual harassment training that I've taken, this is not really significantly emphasized. And that is how a person who perceives themselves to be harassed should proceed. how they should react and what they should, who they should tell and what the process is. And I think that's the next phase of sexual harassment training, is to actually train potential targets of sexual harassment for how to react, who to tell, how to document. All those steps are really important things, because one of the most common things that the victims of sexual harassment, and they can be either sex, the victims will say, well, I told my supervisor and they didn't do anything about it. Well, there's a next step called the EEOC. And so sexual harassment training really needs to include more specifics about what to do next. So you can see I'm trying to carve myself out a niche so I can get on the sexual harassment bandwagon. I have my niche. I have my thing I think we should do next. So workplace diversity management and training. Demographic changes in the workforce really necessitate new HR approaches to managing that workforce. There have been significant changes in demographics over the past 50 years in the workplace. Diversity training is a $10 billion a year industry. So you can see where IO psychologists are like, oh yeah, this seems like a growth industry to me, because we can really work up these trainings and that psychology side of it is really the part that gives us that edge over, let's say, an in-house company production of some kind of training. Having that psychological, part included in the training is really where we shine. 60% of Fortune 500 companies provide some type of diversity training. And when I say some type, it can range from, how to interact with the males and the females in the workplace. And that might actually manifest itself as sexual harassment training. I was actually asked to take a diversity training back in it was like 2008 or something like that. And it said it was going to be diversity training. And I was like, right on. I really want to see what kind of training this is going to be. I was really excited to take it. Really, I was that category of motivated students to take the class and everything. And then it turned out to be sexual harassment training. And I was like, this is probably my 10th time taking sexual harassment training. Can I please see what the diversity training would be like? So far, I have not gotten to take it. I've taken training on diversity and hiring decisions, but I don't think that's quite the same. I would like to see what I have not gotten to experience as an employee through my employer diversity training. And I really would like to see what that would look like personally. So yet another thing I can wish for. But most companies, 60% at least of the Fortune 500 companies, provide some sort of diversity training. So that's a push in a good direction. I was just talking to a student yesterday who's an international student from Europe, and we were talking about some of the misconceptions that she's experienced here in the U.S. or differences that she's noticed between her experience growing up and then the way people do things in the U.S. And as a potential employee working in the U.S., she's got some differences in how she talks about things. Like an example would be that she's doing an internship, and somebody at the place where she was interning was wearing a very short skirt, and she commented on it. And her employer said, we're really not supposed to comment on that. She didn't say it to the person wearing it. She said it to the person next to her. Wow, that's a short skirt. And the supervisor said, well, we really don't say stuff like that. And she was kind of he said, it sounds judgmental. And she was kind of taken aback because she said, I was just commenting on how's that a judgment? And she was really she was not trying to judge the person. She literally was commenting on it. And she felt like that's not a judgment. It's just an observation. And I said, well, I think what the message he was trying to send is we don't comment on people's appearance, I guess. But, and maybe as a man, he really felt uncomfortable having somebody comment on the length of a woman's skirt. I don't know what exactly his motives were, but my student was very like, what did I get wrong? And it's really, so, cross-cultural diversity, right? The things that are normal in one culture may be not normal in another culture, or might be offensive in another culture, or might be discriminatory in another culture. And so it's really important for people to be open to cultural differences, sex differences, gender differences, sexual orientation differences, religious differences. I mean, there's so many things that we can differ on and be respectful and be able to coexist with our colleagues and treat them with respect without differences coming between us. So the primary objectives of diversity training are to increase awareness about diversity issues. A lot of times when we've been within a particular setting, come from a particular group, it could be our age, it could be a lot of different things. We kind of start to believe that our way of viewing the world is sort of the normal way to view the world, or that our behaviors are sort of like the normal behaviors. And it isn't until we start to become aware that other people have different ways of doing things or thinking about things or eating or other things that we start to realize, wait a second, people do this differently. My daughter gave a good example from her childhood, because I have a real problem with food with little seeds in it. I'm fine with strawberries for some reason, as long as I'm eating the strawberries, but I don't like really them to have seeds in a smoothie or something. I just don't like the texture. It's a weird little thing. So for me, I really don't like kiwi because of that. Like, I don't mind if I could cut around the seedy part of it and just eat the green part. I like the flavor of it. I just don't like the seeds. So her growing up, we just never really had kiwis in the house because I didn't like them. And so she's like, went to her now husband's house and when they were dating, and she's like, and they had kiwis there. And I'm like, yeah, a lot of people eat kiwis. And she's like, we never have kiwis. I didn't know I liked kiwis. I like kiwis. Like, she'd had this brilliant, awareness that there's another way that people can eat. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I don't like seeds, but mommy doesn't like seeds. And the other thing she thought she was going to break out from is I don't like fish. I mean, I eat tuna fish, I eat halibut, I eat a few things, but I just really don't like, trout or salmon in particular. I really just don't care for. And so we just really don't have it very often. My husband likes it, but, I don't make it. And so she thought she was going to break free of the, my iron fist, not letting her eat fish. And that was another diversity moment that she learned, that apparently she does belong to my group and she also doesn't like fish. It's like, our eyes get open about some pretty, minuscule things just by going to other people's houses and finding out how they live and their approach to doing things and stuff like that. And then, of course, when you're in the workplace, you may have very large differences between you and your colleagues on lots of different ways, lots of different characteristics and things. And so training can help us to be aware that there are differences, right? And to maybe give us some examples of the kind of differences you might experience, or ways to react when you experience a difference, like maybe not commenting on it or things like that. Training can really help us to reduce biases and stereotypes that could interfere with effective management in particular. I think I mentioned in a previous lecture that I'm reading this book about this guy who recruits for basketball, and he mentioned that he didn't know he was doing it until now he's reflecting on it. He realized that he thought that this basketball player, his last name is Lin, who's of Asian descent, couldn't possibly be a very good basketball player because he's Asian. Now he's realizing is what his bias was. He didn't at the time think, oh my gosh, this guy's Asian, I'm not going to hire him. He thought instead he wasn't as fast as he really was, or that he couldn't dribble as well as he really does. He just wasn't seeing the information clearly because his innate bias was causing him to discount the things that he was seeing. Now, becoming aware of these kinds of biases make it more likely that when we start to have a thought like, this guy's not as fast as the other guys. Oh, wait a second. He just ran faster than the guy next to him. That must have been my bias speaking, right? Like, if we start to become aware, then it makes it less likely that it will be the thing that governs us, right? Stereotyping, same thing. Like I mentioned earlier in this chapter, that we shouldn't be just sending all the older employees for their technology training, right? Like that would be stereotyping. Some older employees don't need technology training. And so we want to make sure that we're making decisions, especially in management decisions, that are based on objective behaviors and things like that, and not on our preconceived biases or the stereotypes that we're carrying. And then, of course, really probably the largest goal is that through this kind of training, people will change their behaviors so that we can have a cohesive group of employees who are effectively managed, and we're not having, lawsuits and problems between employees, maybe certain kinds of employees not wanting to work for our organization because we start to get a reputation for being, discriminatory or I was sitting next to a woman on the way home from Seattle on a flight, and she said that she works for the state government in like natural resources or something. And she said probably 3 different times while we were talking about what she does for a living and you know, how she works from home out of Spokane and only has to go to Olympia once a month and stuff. But like 3 separate times she brought up that it's an old boys club. It's a good old boys club. And so there's clearly, you know, this perception, a reality. I'm not sure that, you know, really this department is populated by men and that really women don't fit in here. And you really don't want in an organization to scare off potential employees of different types because they've heard that kind of, I mean, she said it to me 3 times on a 40-minute flight from Seattle. So I'm going to say that message probably has been spread to lots of people. And so there might be a lot of women who are like, well, I wouldn't want to work there. I didn't have to think that thought because I wouldn't be qualified to work there. But, you know, maybe she's talked to other women who maybe had been targeting a position in that department, and maybe she's scared them off because they're like, well, I don't know if I want to work in a place like that. So if we can have an organization where everybody's respectful of each other's differences and everybody's, you know, sort of cohesive, then it's less likely that the organization gets a bad reputation. And so you aren't going to scare away potential employees. There is favorable evidence for the effectiveness of diversity training. It's a little stronger than even the sexual harassment training. A lot of times, this is kind of easier information to convey because there are so many great examples of things that people that you can use in the training that people are like, oh yeah, I didn't know that was a bias to think that. I thought everybody acted or thought the way I think. And it opens people's eyes in a way that, like, a lot of times with sexual harassment, you have sort of a us against them sort of feeling. And there's a really negative sort of stereotype about taking sexual harassment training that I don't think has really permeated the diversity training field as much. So it seems to have a better effectiveness overall. And so that's really good news. So those are my 2 main ones that I wanted to talk about: sexual harassment training and diversity management and training. So we will reconvene in the next chapter, and I will see you guys there. All right.